The first thing people noticed wasn't his face, it was the sound of his footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Each one echoing across the shining marble floor like a quiet reminder that he didn't belong there. The doors of the Grand Haven Hotel slid open, letting in a gust of cold rain and a man who looked completely out of place in the golden glow of chandeliers. His coat was soaked through, clinging to his shoulders like it hadn't been dry in weeks. His shoes, cracked, muddy, and torn, left faint footprints on the flawless white tiles. A few guests by the fireplace looked up, frowning. The lobby was warm, smelling of roses and expensive coffee, but when he entered, the air seemed to shift. Conversations slowed. Smiles faded. The pianist in the corner hesitated, missing a note. The man looked around quietly, taking it all in. He wasn't trembling, but his eyes, deep, thoughtful, tired, carried something the room didn't have: humility. He stepped forward slowly, his head bowed, his voice low. "Good evening," he said softly. The young receptionist behind the counter blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. Her makeup was flawless, her blazer neatly pressed, and her smile practiced. Sir, can I help you?" she asked, forcing a polite tone. "Yes," the man replied. "I'd like a room for the night." A small silence followed. Then came the whisper. Then the laugh. A bellboy near the elevator tried to stifle a chuckle. The concierge leaned toward the receptionist and whispered, "Did he just say he wants a room?" The receptionist couldn't help it, she giggled, too. "Sir," she said carefully, as if talking to a child, "this is the Grand Haven Hotel. The cheapest room here costs more than a used car." The man nodded calmly, his expression unchanged. "I understand," he said. "Still, I'd like a room." A guest walking past scoffed under his breath, muttering, "Unbelievable." Another whispered, "They really let anyone walk in here these days." The receptionist straightened up, trying to regain her composure. "Sir, maybe you're looking for a shelter downtown. They'll have beds available." "I'm not looking for charity," he interrupted gently. His voice wasn't angry, but it carried a quiet strength, the kind that made her hesitate for just a second. But then the manager appeared. A tall man in a perfectly tailored suit, name tag shining, Mr. Dalton, general manager. He had that kind of confidence that came from power over people, not purpose. He looked the stranger up and down like he was a stain on the lobby floor. "What's going on here?" Dalton asked sharply. The receptionist smiled nervously. "Nothing, sir. This gentleman is asking for a room." Dalton turned to the man. "A room? Here?" He let out a short laugh. "Sir, this hotel isn't open to situations like yours." "Situations like mine?" the man asked quietly. Dalton crossed his arms. "You don't look like someone who can afford to stay here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before you disturb our guests." The man tilted his head slightly, meeting the manager's eyes for the first time. There was no anger there, just calm. Calm that made Dalton uncomfortable. "I just need a place to rest," the man said again, his voice steady. "I can pay." He reached into his coat and pulled out an old, worn wallet. Inside were a few crumpled bills, enough for a cheap meal maybe, but certainly not for a night at the city's most luxurious hotel. Dalton looked at it, then at him, and laughed. "Sir," he said mockingly, "we don't take donations here." The bellboy snickered. The receptionist looked away, embarrassed but unwilling to speak up. The man put the money back in his wallet, carefully, almost tenderly, as though it mattered to him not because of its value, but its dignity. "Please," he said softly, "I've had a long day. I just need to rest for a few hours." Dalton waved his hand dismissively. "Security," he called out. A guard nearby stepped forward. But before he could reach the man, the stranger spoke again, this time, clearly, and with a strange, quiet finality. 9 minutes, he said. The manager frowned. What did you say? The man met his gaze and repeated, 9 minutes. That's all it takes to see who people really are. Dalton rolled his eyes. Sir, I don't have time for nonsense. Please leave, now. The man nodded once, his expression unreadable. All right, he said softly. He turned toward the door, the cold wind brushing against his coat as he stepped outside once more. Inside, the staff laughed again, shaking their heads. Did you see that? The receptionist whispered. He really thought he could get a room here. The bellboy smirked. Bet he's back on the street already. But what none of them knew, what none of them could even imagine, was that in exactly 9 minutes, everything they thought they knew about that man, and about themselves, would change forever. The rain had slowed, but the tension inside the Grand Haven Hotel hadn't. The echoes of laughter still lingered in the air like perfume that refused to fade. The receptionist straightened a few papers on her desk, pretending to look busy, though her hands trembled slightly. Deep down, something about that man's calmness had unsettled her. It wasn't just sadness she saw in his eyes, it was knowing. Unbelievable, the concierge muttered, shaking his head. That guy thought he could stay here? The nerve. The manager, Mr. Dalton, adjusted his cufflinks with satisfaction. Some people don't understand where they belong. I handled it. He smiled faintly, proud of himself. That's what leadership is about, keeping order. The receptionist forced a laugh, but her voice cracked. He didn't even argue back. He just looked at us. Dalton shrugged. People like him don't have the right to argue. Let him find a shelter. A few guests nearby whispered, some glancing at the doors where the man had disappeared. An elderly woman in a fur coat leaned toward her husband and said softly, "Poor soul. Still, he shouldn't have come here." Her husband nodded. The staff were right to turn him away. Outside, the street was still wet. The man walked down the steps, his reflection rippling in puddles under the dim glow of the hotel lights. He paused for a moment beneath the golden sign that read the Grand Haven Hotel, Luxury Redefined. His eyes lifted, calm and distant. Luxury, he murmured. Let's see how deep that word goes. He took out a small phone from his pocket, pressed a single button, and said just 3 words. Begin in 9. Then, he slipped the phone back into his coat and walked toward the corner, disappearing into the misty street. Back inside, 9 minutes felt like nothing, and yet, it would become everything. The lobby returned to its rhythm. Guests checked in. Luggage carts rolled. The pianist resumed playing a soft tune, the kind that sounded like perfection but felt hollow. Still, the staff couldn't quite shake the memory of the man's last words. 9 minutes, the bellboy whispered. What do you think he meant? The receptionist shrugged. Probably nothing. He was just trying to sound mysterious. But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. At exactly the 6th minute, the doors of the hotel slid open again. This time, the air changed instantly. 2 sleek black cars had stopped outside, engines humming softly. 4 men in suits stepped in, all tall, all wearing earpieces. Their expressions were cold, focused. They looked around the lobby, scanning faces. The guests fell silent. The pianist stopped playing mid-note. Good evening, one of the suited men said, his voice crisp. We're here for a private inspection. Dalton frowned, confused. Inspection? At this hour? I wasn't informed. The man reached into his jacket and showed a document. You are now. Dalton's chest tightened. He tried to keep his voice steady. May I ask, who ordered this inspection? The suited man's expression didn't change. You'll find out shortly. Please stand by. The staff exchanged nervous glances. The receptionist bit her lip. The concierge whispered, "This feels off." 7 minutes. Dalton walked toward the front doors, peering through the glass. The black cars were still there, headlights shining like watchful eyes. "Ridiculous," he muttered. "Probably corporate nonsense." 8 minutes. The elevator chimed softly. Everyone turned. The doors opened slowly. And out stepped the man they had thrown out. He wasn't dripping wet anymore. His coat was gone. His hair was neat. The fake beard, gone. Instead, he stood tall in a perfectly tailored suit, his posture strong, his gaze steady. The same man, yet completely different. The lobby went silent. The air seemed to freeze. The manager's mouth fell open. "Wait, what?" Before he could finish, one of the suited men stepped forward and spoke clearly. "Everyone, please meet Mr. Elijah Cole, founder and CEO of the Grand Haven Hotel." It was as if the words struck the room like thunder. The receptionist gasped, covering her mouth. The concierge's face turned pale. The bellboy stumbled backward. Even the guests looked at each other, whispering, "That's the owner?" Elijah looked around the lobby slowly, his calm eyes meeting each familiar face, the same faces that had mocked him, judged him, turned him away. He said nothing at first. Silence became his power. Dalton tried to recover, forcing a laugh that didn't sound human anymore. "Sir. We didn't know it was you. Had we known?" Elijah raised his hand. "That's the point," he said quietly. The words landed heavier than any shout. He looked down at the marble floor, where faint muddy footprints, his footprints, still marked the tiles. "You see these?" he said softly. "That's the dirt you didn't want on your floor." Then his eyes lifted again. "But it's the same dirt I walked through when I built this place from nothing." The room stayed frozen in silence. Elijah turned toward the receptionist, who looked like she might cry. "I asked for a room," he said gently. "You laughed." Then he looked at the manager. "You called security." His tone never rose, it didn't need to. The truth was heavier than any anger could be. 9 minutes, Elijah said, glancing at his watch. Exactly 9 minutes, to see who people really are. Dalton swallowed hard, his confidence collapsing like glass. "Sir, please, let us explain." Elijah looked at him, calm and unmoved. "You already did," he said. Without saying a word. The silence in the lobby felt almost alive, thick, heavy, and impossible to escape. Every person stood frozen, their faces pale with disbelief. The man they had laughed at not even 10 minutes ago now stood before them, composed, regal, and commanding the entire room without saying much at all. Elijah Cole. The name itself carried power. The founder, the visionary, the man whose photo hung proudly on the founder's wall, just a few steps away from the reception desk. The same man they had just insulted, mocked, and thrown out into the rain. The manager, Dalton, tried to steady his breathing. His mouth moved, but no words came. His brain was scrambling for excuses, for explanations, for anything that could undo what had just happened. "Yes, sir, please. I didn't recognize you," he stammered, his voice trembling. You were in disguise." Elijah's eyes didn't soften. "And that's why I wore it," he replied calmly. "To see who you are when no one's watching." The receptionist felt her knees weaken. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Sir. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." Elijah turned toward her, his tone still calm but his words sharp as glass. "You didn't mean to judge me because you thought I was poor? Or because you thought I was invisible?" She looked down, her lips shaking. I was just doing my job." "No," Elijah said quietly. "You were doing what your heart allowed you to do. And what I saw tonight wasn't professionalism. It was pride. He took a few steps forward, his shoes echoing across the marble floor. The sound was almost poetic, the same steps that once drew laughter now drew fear. Guests began whispering again, phones discreetly raised, recording every moment. The story that would soon reach millions was being written in real time. Elijah stopped beside the front desk. "When I built this hotel," he said, "I wanted it to stand for something more than luxury. I wanted it to represent dignity, for everyone. Whether they walked in wearing a suit or sandals. Whether they arrived in a limousine or on foot." His voice grew quieter, yet somehow more powerful. "And tonight, you proved to me that somewhere along the way, we lost that purpose." Dalton's face turned red. "Sir, please, I can explain. You know I've always been loyal to the company." Elijah turned his gaze on him. "Loyalty means nothing when you've forgotten humanity." He gestured to one of his assistants, who stepped forward immediately with a sleek folder. Elijah didn't even glance at it, he already knew what was inside. The names of every staff member who worked this shift. The assistant nodded and handed him the folder. Elijah flipped it open briefly, his eyes scanning down the list. Then he closed it and handed it back. "Every one of them," he said simply. Dalton's throat went dry. "Yes, sir, you're firing us?" Elijah's eyes didn't waver. "I'm giving you exactly what you gave me tonight, nothing." The room fell utterly silent again. The bellboy, who had laughed earlier, whispered under his breath, "Oh my God," his hands shook as he pulled off his uniform hat. Elijah sighed softly, not with anger, but disappointment. "I wasn't testing your efficiency. I wasn't testing your speed. I was testing your kindness, the simplest thing a human being can offer another. And you failed." He turned toward the guests, his tone softening slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for what you witnessed tonight. What you saw wasn't who we are, or at least, it isn't who we're supposed to be." Then he faced the staff once more. "You looked at me and saw a burden. I looked at you and saw potential. But potential without compassion means nothing." Dalton took a step forward, desperation in his voice. "Sir, please, give us another chance." Elijah shook his head. "I gave you that chance the moment I walked in." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the same crumpled bills he had placed on the counter earlier, and set them down gently. "This," he said, "was never about money. It was about manners." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier lights above. Then Elijah gave a small nod to his assistants. "Escort them out, please." As the staff were led away, some crying, some silent, Elijah turned his eyes toward the front doors, the same doors they had thrown him out of not long ago. He walked toward them slowly, pausing once more beneath the Golden Hotel sign. He looked up at it, his reflection shining faintly in the glass, and whispered, almost to himself, "I built this place to bring people together, not to divide them." Then, without another word, he stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights glowed softly in the rain, and for the first time that evening, Elijah smiled. Not out of satisfaction, but out of clarity. The test was over, and the truth had finally been revealed. The doors of the Grand Haven Hotel closed behind the departing staff with a faint, echoing click. Outside, their voices mixed with the steady hum of the rain, fear, regret, disbelief. Inside, silence filled the empty lobby like a ghost. The air that once smelled of expensive perfume and polished marble now carried something else, guilt. The guests stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to clap, to speak, or to simply remain still. The pianist, hands resting on the keys, didn't dare play another note. Even the chandeliers above seemed dimmer, as if ashamed of what they'd witnessed under their light. Elijah Cole stood by the front desk, his posture calm but his eyes distant. The assistant beside him whispered softly, "Sir, the staff are gone." I know, Elijah said. His voice wasn't proud. It wasn't angry. It was heavy, like the sound of a man who carried both justice and sadness at once. He turned slowly, looking around the vast lobby, the space he had once dreamed about as a young man building his empire. Every marble tile, every golden lamp, every detail had once represented his hard work. But tonight, all he could see were the invisible cracks, not in the walls, but in people's hearts. His assistant hesitated. Sir, the news team has already picked up the story. Someone recorded everything. It's going viral. Elijah gave a small, tired smile. Of course they did. He walked toward one of the grand mirrors hanging on the wall. In it, he saw his reflection, clean, composed, powerful, and behind him, the memory of the man in the torn coat, the disguise that had shown him more truth than any report or business meeting ever could. I wanted to see the truth, Elijah murmured, more to himself than anyone else. And I did. His assistant stepped closer. You did the right thing, sir. They disrespected you. They had to learn. Elijah turned to him, his expression thoughtful. Maybe. But tell me, what does it say about us, if the only way people show kindness is when they think someone can help them? The assistant didn't answer. Elijah sighed softly. Power can build walls just as easily as it builds bridges. I wanted to see if this hotel still stood for the bridge. He walked back to the counter and ran his hand over it, smooth, cold marble. When we opened this place, he said, I told the first team we hired something simple. Luxury means nothing if it comes without love. But somewhere along the way, the world changed. People learned how to smile without meaning it, how to serve without caring, how to talk without listening. He paused, glancing toward the elevator. Tomorrow, we start over. Outside, the fired employees stood in the rain, their uniforms clinging to their skin, their hearts heavy. Dalton, the manager, looked up at the glowing sign above the hotel. The name Grand Haven felt like a cruel joke now. The receptionist wiped tears from her face. I can't believe this happened, she whispered. He was testing us all along. Dalton's voice was bitter. He humiliated us. That's what he did. The bellboy shook his head. No, we humiliated ourselves. Those words hung in the air like thunder. Dalton turned away, but deep down, he knew the boy was right. Inside again, Elijah stood at the grand window, watching the city lights dance across wet pavement. Cars passed, people hurried under umbrellas, everyone rushing somewhere, never realizing how much a single act of kindness could change a day, a heart, a life. He spoke softly, almost as if confessing to the rain outside. When I was young, I slept on benches not far from this street. No one knew my name then. But a woman who worked at a small cafe saw me one night shivering. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't judge me. She just gave me coffee, and a smile. His voice trembled slightly, the memory still alive in him. That smile saved me more than the coffee ever could. His assistant stood still, listening. That's why I built this hotel, Elijah continued. I wanted it to be a place where people didn't just check in for comfort, but for care. But tonight, I saw how far we've drifted from that dream. He turned away from the window and faced the assistant. His eyes were calm again, but filled with purpose. Prepare a notice for tomorrow. We're reopening applications for every position, but not the way we used to. This time, we're not hiring based on resumes or fancy words. We're hiring hearts. The assistant nodded slowly, understanding. Elijah looked out the window one last time before heading toward the elevator. The night sky was clearing. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened under the light. Somewhere, he could almost see his reflection again, not as the CEO, not as the billionaire, but as the man who once walked into a hotel, looking for a bit of warmth. And tonight, he'd found something warmer than any room could ever offer, the truth. The next morning, sunlight poured through the glass walls of the Grand Haven Hotel like liquid gold. The storm was over, but its echo still lingered in the air. Workers in maintenance uniforms quietly cleaned the floors, wiping away the muddy footprints left behind from the chaos of the previous night. It was as if the entire building had taken a deep breath, and was now ready to start over. Elijah Cole stood in the lobby once again, wearing a simple gray suit, no disguise, no arrogance, just presence. The night had changed him, and in some way, the city too. Word had spread faster than wildfire. Videos of the homeless man who turned out to be the CEO had flooded social media. Millions watched, shared, and commented. But what mattered most to Elijah wasn't the views, it was the conversations. People were talking about kindness again, about respect, about how easily we judge those who have less. And that, to him, meant something far greater than any headline. His assistant approached with a tablet in hand. "Sir, you've got thousands of job applications already. From all over the country." Elijah smiled faintly. "Good. Let's make sure we choose differently this time." "How so?" He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful but determined. "This time, we're not looking for people who know how to serve luxury, we're looking for people who know how to serve humanity." The assistant nodded slowly, inspired. "And what about Dalton and the old team?" Elijah looked up toward the grand staircase, remembering each of their faces, the smirk of the receptionist, the manager's arrogance, the laughter that once echoed in this very lobby. He exhaled deeply. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said. "But not everyone earns it the same way." A few days later, the hotel reopened under a new slogan. "Luxury begins with love." Every guest who walked in noticed small but powerful changes, handwritten welcome notes, warm greetings, and even a new rule at the front desk: no one leaves this place without a smile. The hotel wasn't just serving 5-star meals anymore, it was serving dignity. One morning, as Elijah reviewed reports in his office, the front desk called. "Sir, there's someone asking to see you," the receptionist said softly. "It's Dalton." Elijah paused, then replied calmly, "Send him in." Dalton entered the room slowly, looking smaller than before, not physically, but in spirit. His once perfect tie was missing, replaced by humility. "Mr. Cole. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I was wrong. I let pride take over my heart. You didn't deserve that." Elijah didn't speak right away. He looked at Dalton, really looked, not as a boss seeing an employee, but as a man seeing another man trying to rebuild himself. "Tell me," Elijah finally said, "what did you learn?" Dalton's voice trembled. "That respect isn't earned by money or position. It's earned by how you treat people, especially when you think no one's watching." Elijah nodded slowly. "Then you've already taken your first step back." Dalton blinked, unsure what he meant. Elijah gestured toward the front door. "We're holding an orientation today for new trainees. You'll start there, not as a manager, but as a mentor. Teach them what you've learned the hard way." Dalton's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, sir. I won't waste this chance." Weeks passed. Grand Haven Hotel began trending again, but this time for all the right reasons. Guests left glowing reviews not about chandeliers or champagne, but about the kindness they received. Stories began spreading: a bellboy who helped an old woman across the street, a chef who cooked free meals for the homeless every Friday, a receptionist who remembered every guest's name. Elijah watched all this unfold quietly, often sitting in the lobby like any other guest. Sometimes he'd smile when staff didn't recognize him. That was exactly how he wanted it. The power of kindness should never depend on recognition. One evening, as the golden hour light filled the lobby, a little boy approached him. The boy held a paper cup of coffee, warm and steaming. "Sir," the boy said shyly, "you looked tired." I thought you might like this. Elijah blinked, surprised. Thank you, son. What's your name? Leo, the boy said proudly. My mom works here now. She says we treat everyone like family. Elijah smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. Your mom is a wise woman. As the boy ran off, Elijah took a sip of the coffee, simple, no sugar, no fancy aroma, and closed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't the billionaire CEO, the man who built skyscrapers, or the legend trending online. He was just Elijah, a man who once stood outside this very place, cold and unseen, waiting for someone to care. And now, he had built a world where caring wasn't optional, it was the foundation. He looked around the lobby, hearing laughter, warmth, humanity, the kind of sound money could never buy. Under his breath, he whispered. Maybe now, this hotel finally belongs to the right people. The screen fades to black.